how to effectively implement security management in DevOps. Adrian de Rotours is our host, and he'll be talking about how to effectively implement security management in DevOps. There's the course outline, how to effectively implement DevSecOps in the cloud, what are the benefits of a DevSecOps approach, running containers, vulnerability management in CI and CD, a practical DevOps security checklist, and more. Over to you, Adrian. Take it away.
Okay, basically will be to expand our knowledge about what is DevSecOps. It's the security approach for DevOps. We'll be learning the benefit to implement DevSecOps in digital transformation processes in a company. Certainly, one of the most important components of DevSecOps is the container. So we'll be reviewing how to implement and manage containers. When we talked about vulnerability management, usually it happens during the CI/CD process. And when we say CI/CD, usually is continuous integration and continuous delivery and deployment, both. So we're using CD for both concepts. And finally, we'll run a DevSecOps checklist that I think that this part is really the most valuable part of the webinar, because if you had the opportunity to participate in my previous webinar, always my goal is to provide you a tool to apply the topics that we review in a real scenario. So really the goal is that after the webinar, you will have a tool to be used in your companies, and you will be applying good practices on this topic. So as we heard, the different topics that we'll be talking about are how to effectively implement DevSecOps with some suggestions about it, the containers management, vulnerability management in CI/CD, finally the DevSecOps security checklist. So after to review all these items, we'll be able to really understand what are the benefits to apply DevSecOps, because again, several companies are running their digital transformation. The first part, as you know, is agile. After that, we start with some automation for testing, and after that, they integrate operation through DevOps. But certainly, this middle word sec, the DevSecOps, is one of the most critical part of the DevOps implementation. So really quick, before to start, will you wrap up about what DevOps means? Remember that always we are talking about culture, process, tools, and infrastructure, right? So for DevSecOps, it's applicable for all these parts of DevOps, right? Usually we think that security is only for infrastructure, in some part for tools, because you know the password, the user password, and different level of security or accesses or rights that we have in tools. But other thing that we'll see during the webinar is that security is cross for the entire process, is cross to the different part of DevOps. And I'm talking about culture, certainly, process, tools, and infrastructure. Before to start and to set the expectation, we won't be talking about rugged DevOps security, because rugged security is only for software. So we'll be covering DevSecOps, which is an end-to-end practices, right? So, sorry about that. The different processes that we have in DevOps are continuous integration. Remember that I mentioned CI, continuous delivery and deployment. We use the D for both, and continuous operation. And everything is turning around the continuous assessment, attending the business demands, and producing business outcomes. So this is really the IT value change approach that we'll be talking about. So moving to the how to effectively implement DevSecOps. The key challenges that we need to face in DevOps are the elimination of fixed processes, toll gates or milestones, the elimination as well of the separation of powers between system and application, and the uncertainty regarding responsibility for risk. So this is the beginning, right? They are the real challenges that we are. So for the first one, what has already found its way into the interactive project management process applies even more to DevOps are the individual milestones that require manual approval are counterproductive for DevOps because they extended the lead time from idea to production, right? So therefore, DevOps does not allow security reviews to be anchored before go live. And it's often the case in classically managed projects. So remember that we need to reduce the lead time, so we need to promote the flow, and sometimes that is reducing the amount of security. So this is the first challenge, right? What does it mean, the second one? So due to the diversification of skills and the associated end-to-end responsibility within the DevOps team, because remember, it's the same team for development, testing, and operation. All team members receive the same authorization. That is a new challenge, right? So the consequence of this is that many more individuals gain access to valuable data, and we have a new risk on this. And the last one is what was anchored via the line function in strictly hierarchy organization is bound to the role in DevOps organization. So risk should have an owner who bears or mitigates them, right? So we need to face all these challenges. And what is really the framework DevSecOps? So the three parts of the framework that you are seeing it here are people, process, and technology. And remember that we talk about this when in the first slide, right? So the security activities, finally, which is the important part right here, is that everything should be applied iteratively, right? Through the automation way. So security will be impacting people, process, and technology, as we said. And how to implement, again, effectively DevSecOps. We know that all the roles, the different roles are involved in DevSecOps basic knowledge. It's we need to train all the levels, all the different levels, from the information worker, the data entry, the final user, until the executive level. Business representative, architect, engineer, all should be impacted by the strategy, and all of them, more certainly the higher level, need to know the architecture of the system. And through the shift-left approach, responsibility for vulnerability and threats is concentrated directly in the DevOps team. So the central security organization provides support and empowerment and control. However, everyone is responsible for the security. Why? because DevOps organizations are very dynamic, and it can help if the roles are maintained in a central registry. So they think that everybody has rights. Well, we need to maintain all the rights in a central registry. So this always make it clear who has what role and in what form they need to be informed. So in any case, the definition of new role should be handled sparingly, right? As each additional role generates new interfaces at those additional coordination efforts. So again, in order to keep the organization as lean as possible to promote the flow that we mentioned, we need to react quickly to changing requirements. And changing requirement could be different, right? New users, release one level of users, you know, so it makes sense to introduce security roles step by steps. So organizational arrangements, as we see of the security roles, includes the different teams of DevOps, includes the security officer, includes the security coach if we have at your company, and certainly the business representative. So moving forward to the next slide, and this is just for your references. That's to be clear. It said this Swisscom. Swisscom is a telecommunication company, right? That it's applying. I can say the best practices in DevSecOps in the world. Probably when we talk about DevOps, you heard about Netflix, about Target, that really they are applying good DevOps principle. Where for DevSecOps, Swisscom is a good example, and they have internally different type of certifications for security, right? So actually they have 4 levels. With each level, the content becomes more specialized. So we have the tracker at left, from really the hiker level, the maintainer level, and finally the alpinist. So why Swisscom is doing this is that to be sure that everyone in the company has the required knowledge. And you can imagine that the basic knowledge is a simple training that everybody receives. And depending of the level in the company, for instance, one architect or the security responsible must have the alpinist right here, the alpinist certification. So finally, if at your company you don't have this type of certifications, at least you need to prepare a training plan, and everybody needs to be involved, and not only one time. In the company where I worked, we have a refresh every 6 months to be sure that we are respecting and applying the security principles in the company. So moving to containers, and containers is one of the, I can say one of the most critical part in the DevSecOps environment, because it's a way to protect different pieces of code. So it's a standard unit of software, right? It should be a program. And all the dependencies of this application could run independently to the other ones, and doesn't matter the platform where they are running. What does this mean? That is that containers could isolate software, right, from the environment, containing everything what they need to run and to work uniformly, despite the difference that we have into the development. So you could imagine different programs produced in PHP, in C#, in Java, running in a Linux server or running in a Windows server, working with all the security principles and being accessed by anyone from different platforms. So one of the most famous and popular software managing containers is Docker, right? As you could see here, you have the infrastructure in the bottom. We have the host operating system. Doesn't matter what it is. It should be Windows, Linux, Unix, and Docker is the responsible to manage all the application under a containerized pool of applications with all the security principles individually applied by each one. So that is really, it's really very, very important. And how we manage the containers into the different platforms. As I said in the previous slide, you could see that Docker could work with Linux, with Windows, in the cloud, in local servers. So Docker will be the responsible to manage everything. And all the containers must have a relationship among them, as you could see right here. And we have different commands to run the containers. So imagine that all the process or all the different commands that we have here in the bottom allow us to add different containers, to remove containers, to post container. So starting from the left to the right, we could create containers to run it later on with required image, right? And on the same way, the second is, this command is to run Docker container with the required image and specify command or process. So if you take a look on the different containers, they could be, they could have relationship with other containers, and you could run it, you could pause the containers, you could unpause the containers as well. And again, all these commands are available from your platform and is completely transparent for the operating system. Why we are doing this? Because it's the only way to protect from different attacks our programs individually, you know? So certainly it's more difficult for a hacker to impact different containers and different amount of containers that contain their own security level and protection. In other way, when we work with 3 layers, remember the famous 3 layers imposed by Microsoft 10 years ago, if you cross some level of protection as a hacker, you could enter to all the data or information. With containers, each container has their own security. For that reason, is certainly more secure. To implement, to manage the containers, we have these 10 different stages. We'll only mention the 10 priorities with a simple explanation, because again, the focus is to share with you the checklist to implement DevSecOps. But it's good to know that the first thing when we manage containers is to promote the integration of all the containers. It's if we have isolated containers without links to the other ones, probably the security risk will be higher. So we need to have the plan, a security plan in compliance with the framework that we are using. It's all the interfaces with the networking security rules must be applied in our containers. We need to place it operators back in control always. It's the operation of all the containers should be centralized. We need, as I mentioned, support hybrid infrastructure. It's local infrastructure or WAN infrastructure or cloud infrastructure. The Kubernetes management is something related to a software that allows to manage containers in the same way than Dockers, and Kubernetes distribute a good practices standard to be applied, doesn't matter you use the software or not. The transitioning to the microservices, and the microservices is a group of containers, so we need to promote this type of transition with our containers as well. All the application centric should be oriented to containers management as well. It's if we have some part of our application without containers, that will imply a vulnerability of our system, as we'll see in some minutes. And the last three are related to the transition that we'll need to do to the legacy environment, to the new one. And after that, to perform the leverage of our platform as a service, it's to manage all the component of our platform as a service, and the same for the different functions that we have in our software structure. The prioritization is something that will be dynamic according to our business needs. So please remember that these are the 10 main priorities for containers management. And what is the vulnerability management? Well, what is the impact to have everything linked, to have the containers as well? So what we have, first of all, I don't know if we need to review exactly the meaning of CI and CD, right? So we must understand that CI/CD environments comprise not only two, as I mentioned. We are including continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment, right? So the integration of the three processes helps us to create and deploy flexible application for the management of our digital environment and infrastructure. However, the combination of CI/CD by continuous deployment brings different results for those CI/CD combination by continuous delivery. So especially in the regards of vulnerability management, what is a topic that certainly we'll be reviewing right here. So summarizing, continuous integration in CI/CD basically is to create, validate, and deploy changes and test them automatically. I'm talking about the code, right? It's everything what we code will be in there, and we will be able to be the same environment. Continuous delivery is to have ready to be implemented the pieces of code that we finished according to the business needs. It's if we have I don't know, Mother's Day campaign in 10 days, we complete the code and it is ready to be deployed. However, we decide to don't do it until the Mother's Day. You know what I mean? So this is continuous delivery. And continuous deployment really is when we could automatically move the development to the production environment without any human intervention, right? So the environment certainly handle your security events. And the different events that we could have related to vulnerability, right, are these four. It's we could have new vulnerability, it's an unknown vulnerability, and certainly we don't know if they will be impacting or not our security. Remember that vulnerability is someone that is attacking our system, and we detect that our entries are vulnerable. After that, we'll evaluate if the attack was effective or not. So for now, it's only the event 1 is new vulnerability. The event 2 is the impacts of such vulnerability in our system. So right now we are talking about real impacts. The event 3 is the security patch management, is regular activities that we are doing to apply different patches. And the event 4 is the vulnerability solution. It's the state update in our CI/CD environment, right? So as we said, the new vulnerability, if new vulnerability strikes, we have to verify if it affects or not, right? One or more of our libraries, for instance, and if it was disclosed. So further decision will depend on this. If it was attacked, but without any impact, we could decide after that what we'll do. So the impact 2, or the event 2, is the impact really of such vulnerability in our system. So in the case that, in effect, some functionalities of our system are really impacted and compromised with the new vulnerability. So then the next step is to determine the full extent it has. How really was the impact? So vulnerability reports are useful to do so, and we could have certainly a different type of documents. So once we document this, we will be able to take one of the one or two or more decisions, right? So one could be mark vulnerability as not exploitable in our system. So with this action, we can deal with it afterward, no problem, or proceed to update the effect system with the respected patches, if we have the patches, right? And according to the criteria that we set. What is security patch management, right? It's a once we determine if the patch proceeds, we must take into consideration the two different scenarios, actually. The first is it more profitable in monetary terms to implement the patch? It's a cost-benefit analysis, right? Or we could assume the exploitation of the security flaw, it should be a case. And the second scenario, the second option, is in case it results more profitable to implement the patch, determine if the solution is compatible with our system of functionalities, okay? So to close this, the event 4 is the vulnerability solution. In the worst scenario, we will not be able to patch our system to correct the vulnerability. So still we have other security options and available. We must determine and verify the extent of the threat over the system. Okay, so again, the two options, if our system is vulnerable, we can apply alternative security measures to prevent ourselves from the exploitation of the vulnerability. If our system is not vulnerable, because it affects a specific system that does not compromise the integrity of our entire network infrastructure, it's okay, right? So both are the option that we have. So just to summarize, is the notes in the bottom of the slide, is addressing and managing the vulnerabilities, as we saw in our CI/CD, represent critical points. So it's supposed that we have a vulnerability manager in our DevSecOps instructor. Okay, so we arrived to the DevSecOps checklist. And again, it's a recommendation for good practices. And you could use this checklist as a guide. This checklist contains, as you could see, 7 categories. The first one is APIs. After that, the development, how we develop and with which level of security. The protection of our infrastructure, of our applications. The environment as itself, an environment, I'm talking about the development environment, test environment, QA environment, pre-prod if you have a prod. The employee behaviors, this is not technical things, right? But how we are managing our passwords, how we are coding as employees, how we are using our physical security devices, for instance. The following is the coding is which type of security principles we are using each time that I code. For instance, how we are accessing to a database, how we are accessing to a table. So you will see the step-by-step to be sure that we are fully compliant with the security rules. At least, at the end, sorry, the culture behaviors in our company that will promote a good application of the security principles as well. So starting with the first one, we have, again, in 15 minutes probably, we won't be able to cover all the details, but please use this material to run your checklist. Certainly after the checklist, you will be able to perform a gap analysis, evaluate your company if you are really compliant or not compliant from a DevSecOps perspective. So the first point, which is the secure your APIs. As you know, the APIs enable interaction and sharing of data between applications, therefore more exposed and prone the security risk. So secure all the APIs the company consumes as well as those it exposed to the public. So using encryption, for instance, to protect request information in transit would be a good approach. So this is the first thing to be validated. Authenticate and authorize API users. So use API IDs and API keys to identify and authenticate users, device or application is the recommended practice. So use an access control framework, such for instance an OAuth to control APIs. It's an option, right? So secure all the transmission path is other option that we have. For instance, encrypt all the connection to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. I don't know if you do know that. It's the man-in-the-middle is the application which is an interface between the requester and the database. So sometimes the man-in-the-middle, if the information is not encrypted, should be impacting our security. Other is to enforce the use of the SSL, the security service level, and TLS protocol in all our application. Is the locker that you could see in the browser. Use web application firewalls is other possibility for this. I don't know, move back to validate input data content types, for instance. Validate all data to prevent application layer attacks in the different layers. So ensure safe input data from user, database system, external sources. In addition, perform integrity checks for data and validate the integrity with the sender. And finally, we could say that prevent the API parameters is basically to tamper and enable the reverse engineer of the API, such that it exposes data or becomes vulnerable to DDoS attacks. Protecting them ensure that your web, cloud, or mobile application. So this is for APIs. I think that cover everything what we need for APIs. And moving, really quick to development, which is the other part. And the first is make security part of the entire development process. Again, in order to don't go deep in details, but I have to mention that integrate security early in the development process is the goal. So give its requirements the same weight as functional requirements, that involve adding security control processes as well automating the core security task in the workflow is something critical. The different test security throughput the development cycle. What does it mean? That it makes security testing an integral part of the continued processes of entire app dev cycle. So perform tests on applications, on APIs, on containers, on processes, and microservices for sure. So that will address all flows during development process, since it's easier and less costly, right? Always to apply this in the left side will be more cost effective than do it in the opposite way. Automate all the process, again, is part of the security, as part of the configuration management and testing and other tasks to reduce the workload. The monitor the process infrastructure and apps is gathering real-time intelligence enabled when you make better decisions, right? And accurate informants to complete the testing. So collect and analyze relevant metrics is a good example. Have events logs and machine data to gain real insights across the application lifecycle and be able to react really quick. And finally, generate actionable alerts when there are issues, is to deploy a tool that notify the team when there is an issue. So this is something very common, and they should have the ability to send actionable alerts to relevant people. It's to the people that are affected for the threats, right? So moving to the next category, which is protection. And in protection, the first checklist, and well, I take some of them, right? Because we won't have the time to review everything. So if we take the first one is protect the entire environment and data. I think that is one of the most important. You need in your company to secure the development and operational environment, not only the agile development environment. It's development plus test plus operational. You need to secure your code, your processes, your operating system, and application. Doesn't matter what it is, the application. Remember that if you have one application that is not being used a lot, and you have there a security non-compliance, all your system will be affected. So besides the code, ensure that you have adequate protection for all the data, infrastructure, hardware, and software. And let me move really fast. Let me check what other we could take. Probably the automate security testing and protection. It's something important. So perform automatic security scan for vulnerability in the code. So create and run this process regularly to detect if we have any specific security issue in our code, in our infrastructure, in our applications. We could use a security solution that can detect and certainly block attacks. The antivirus is a good example about the application. We could monitor SQL or SQL Server if we have any issue, our database engine, for instance. Let me move really quick. We could talk about complement automatic testing with create manual testing. This is another interesting point because sometimes we have both in our environments. We have automatic testing and we have manual. So the automatic testing, as you know, the scripts could fail to recognize or identify visual issues that human eyes can pick up. For that reason, several times we do manual or active monitoring, for instance. So in addition, a human tester will interact with the software, so both of them. And another challenge is when the automatic testing scripts contain error that could happen as well, or bugs. So that gives false negative or positive. So if we complement with manual, certainly will be better. Moving to the last one, And sorry about that, because certainly my goal is to provide you all the checklists and not necessary to review all the points. So the last one is the use security tools that continue to evolve. Is that the security solution, as you know, must keep pace with changing application environments and infrastructure. So these should have the ability to protect the system and automatically send alerts when there is a security issue. So again, we'll be reviewing some part of the checklist, not necessarily everything. So starting with the first one, the secure and monitor the entire physical and virtual environment. I was mentioning that isolate Dockers and Kubernetes as both applications are working together. However, we need to validate if all the security rules are applied in a good way by each one. Let me continue with other. So the automate infrastructure configuration and management. For instance, it's time that we need to deploy a development environment, and that activity is automate. We need to validate again that all the security rules are applied on that process. The employee behavior, I think that is typical, and the three different parts of the checklist are talking about the same, is how we are training our resources to work in a secure environment. And we need to check the behaviors with refresh, with internal auditors that will be monitoring in a daily basis, in a weekly basis, if everything is being applied correctly, and promote an spear phishing campaign. The spear phishing, you know, is when you are reading an email and you click in a link and you are allowing with your security rights to a hacker to access to critical information. And sometimes this is very difficult to protect. So something that we need to work is not to correct the attack, is to prevent the attack with our resources. So again, key concepts are security training and use red teams to real world vulnerability. The red team is a team specialized to react when we have an attack. And I mentioned the spear phishing, what it is. And for code, all our developers have to be trained in code security to apply the security rules in our coding. And what you are seeing here, the chaos monkey, is to have a team that will be attacking intentionally, an internal team will be attacking our infrastructure, our code, our environment, just to try what is the level of protection that we have. So this is the introduced chaos in the comfort zone, because if everybody is running okay, it doesn't imply that we are with a high level of security. Probably is because we are not being attacked as with high level of intensity. So the chaos monkey or the chaos theory is a good practice to try our level of security. Finally, the strong security culture in all our company will protect us and our environment as well. And the key concept is everyone does security, not only machine, not only processes, is everyone. So we need to implement DevSecOps to implement certainly a cultural change before. To close, what are the benefits to apply to implement DevSecOps? As you could see, through DevSecOps will greater speed and agility for security teams, because we'll be training our people, and we'll be improving our processes, and we'll be make stronger our infrastructure and tools. We'll be able to respond really quick to our needs, security needs. We'll be promoting a better collaboration and communication in all the team, because all of us are part of the security. We'll promote more opportunity to automate everything. in code, in application, in environment demands, in testing. Through the different automatic application, will be detecting our vulnerabilities and being able to react before we are attacked through the vulnerability management and the different events that we reviewed during the webinar. And the team member assets are freed to work in a high value work. Why? Because if the security is automated, if we have all the process paying attention of our security, certainly we'll have more time to add value to our business.
All right. Thank you, Adrian, for this insightful session.